And we are delighted to partner again with Health Performing Arts to present Carver Hahn. It's an idea we pulled together a few years ago to really bring back some of the really fun stories that so many generations have loved that Edward Rowe Snow made famous, those stories and legends about Boston Harbor. And we're just thrilled that Health Performing Arts has taken it on and made it their own event in such a wonderful way, their own interpretation of the stories, and that's just terrific. So we're going to get started, and I'd like to just ask everyone out of consideration for the performers and your fellow audience members to turn off cell phones and please not use any flash photography during the performance. And following the performance, one of our actors or actresses tonight is celebrating her birthday, so please join us for some birthday cake and some refreshments after the show. Thanks very much. Enjoy.
Hello, my name is Joshua James, and I am a famous lifesaver. I've never been known to have a particle of superstition in my makeup. That being said, I heard the stories of a mysterious buggy that rolled through the village street at midnight. One night, it rolled past me, and such knowing so much about this, I chased right after it. And it didn't go, to my surprise, it didn't go left towards then past it or right towards Battery Heights. It went straight for the railroad. And when it got between the riprap seawall and the little station, it disappeared. Or it went downhill and crashed. But this story has never been satisfactorily solved.
This watch used to belong to my late husband, Captain James Scott, and I'm Mary Scott. We were married for 27 years. That was until that night my husband's ship never returned to port. My husband was a mariner, which meant he spent most of his time out at sea. So I was to go live with my brother, Jeffrey Richardson II, and his wife Elizabeth. They lived in Marshfield, Massachusetts. At 3 o'clock one morning, my brother was suddenly awakened by my husband calling to him.
"Brother Scott has arrived and called to me!"
My brother shouted out. Now, at this time, I was in the hall, the room across the hall. And when I heard this, I started going crazy. But my husband was gone for weeks at end, so I wasn't going to worry about him now. A short time later, my brother woke up again, got dressed in a hurry, walked to the front door, and opened it. He was met by a swirling blizzard. Now at this time, I started to get worried about my husband. Then I heard my brother say, "I am going down the shore now." I went back to bed, not knowing what my brother would find. Later that day, my husband's body was found in the surf at low tide by men that were working on the beach. They brought the body back to the church, and my brother came to get me and his wife. When we got there, the body was so badly marked that I couldn't recognize it. I couldn't tell it was my Jeffrey or my James. The only way I could tell was by the large pocket watch he carried with him. My children grew and prospered. Now my son, Roscoe E. Scott, inherited the watch. As for my brother, he was never able to prove that my husband caught to him at the time of his crash.
This is the story of a haunting on a ship. My ship. And the tale begins when the ship's carpenter, Mr. Hawkington, fell ill and died. He was a man very much respected on board, and we were all very sorry for his passing. So that he might be buried on land, the ship was ordered into port, where we expected to arrive in a few days. But as was custom, the corpse was kept in the ship's cockpit, and a sentry placed at the door. Hockington had been dead for 2 or 3 days, I don't rightly remember which. But as contrary winds had kept us out for longer than expected, it was decided that Mr. Hockington should be committed to the deep on the following day. And the night before that was to happen, I was placed as the sentry at the cockpit. I had hung my lantern from a beam just outside the cockpit door, and the light that it threw was so dim that I endeavored to improve it by snuffing or by lighting a new candle as might be necessary. While I was employed, not having finished that task, the door to the cockpit slammed open with a violence that was so intense it could only have been affected by a powerful bang. I distinctly heard a hollow, gruff voice call out, "Give us a light, sentry!" Well, that sound and that horrible voice so startled me that I knocked the lantern from the beam. It hit the deck and went out, plunging me into darkness. And in that gloom, I ran for the cockpit ladder and began to climb. I heard hollow footsteps approaching behind me, and when I got out to the lower deck, I turned around to see the ghost of Hockington as he reached the top of that ladder. Therefore, I went aft, and it seemed as though I doubled back on the ghost, because I saw him continue up the ladder to the forecastle, where the men on deck soon noticed him. It was a clear and chill night, and the men on watch were lying about the gangways, some asleep, some just staring up at the moon and stars. The ghost seemed to take no notice of them, however, but simply started walking the path that Mr. Hockington was accustomed to taking while alive. It wasn't long before the men on deck noticed him. I saw one of the watchmen rouse his watchmate, point the ghost out to him. "Well, I say, Tom, that's old Hockington walking the deck. Oh, he's coming this way, and I shall be off." Well, that whispered news made the rounds of the deck so quickly that in no time the forecastle was as clear as though it had been raining. The ghost had the entire area to himself. All the sailors had crowded aft to the quarterdeck, and the lieutenant called out to them, "Hey! What do you men want here?" Nobody was anxious to answer that question right away, but once it was repeated, one of the older sailors, a reliable, sturdy old tar, muttered something about the carpenter's ghost. "What? What do you say about a ghost? Be off forward, you blockheads, and quit stopping up my gangways in this manner." "But Hockington is on the forecastle." "Nonsense, men, nonsense," the lieutenant countered. "Mr. Hockington is dead. I'm astonished at you." The answer came back, "But he's on the forecastle now. He's wearing the same monkey jacket he died in, the same hat. His chalk line is hanging from his pocket. Please, sir, go forward and see for yourself." That's when the lieutenant exploded. "Parcel of fools," he says. "Make a lane for me. Make a lane then, men." And they did. The men parted. A path soon opened, and the lieutenant boldly strode forward to the bow of the barge, where he stopped. Because there it was. There was the apparition pacing back and forth, just as the sailors had claimed. The lieutenant's courage began to fail him at that point. He decided that it wouldn't be prudent to approach any further, but instead called out, "Hockington! Is that you?" "Sir!" came the answer from the specter. The lieutenant decided that it would be in his best interest to report the incident to the captain, so he made his way below deck, knocked on the captain's door, for at that time of night the master was still asleep. He called out about the carpenter's ghost. What are you telling me about a ghost?" said the captain, awakening. "Sir, it's Hawkington. It's the carpenter. He's walking the forecastle." "Let him walk the forecastle then, and let him be damned," called the captain, rolling over to resume his slumbers. Knowing that it was in fact his place to get to the bottom of the mystery, the lieutenant went above deck to the forecastle. Great trepidation. He approached the ghost. "Hawkington," he barked. "Why are you here?" The carpenter, puzzled, turned around. He says, "Sir, it's time for my watch." The lieutenant peers closer. He sees a mist of breath coming with the carpenter's words, the way the moon glints on the old man's eyes. Hawkington says, "I heard the 2 bells and called for light from the sentry. When none came, I made my way on deck as fast as I could." Hawkington, apparently not dead, had no memory of the prior 2 days that he spent in the cockpit. The ship's doctor concluded that because of his sickness, Hawkington had fallen into a trance-like state, only awakening when hearing the 2 bells for the watch on the very night before he was supposed to be buried at sea.
Ghost stories? Do I know a ghost story? His family is part of a ghost story. Have you ever heard it? Oh. Well, it concerns my granddad and grandma and my mother. You must have heard it. No? Want to hear it? Okay, well, I got most of this from my grandmother and my mother and various people around town, but I'm not absolutely certain it's exactly how it happened. But it's probably close enough. You know, years ago, my grandfather was a wrecker. You know what a wrecker is? You know, it's not a very nice profession. They were the people who went down onto the rocks, onto the beaches when a ship was wrecked. And they'd see what they could find, any treasure or anything else that they could take and they could sell. And sometimes they weren't quite so fussy about how they got the stuff that they sold. Well, one night there was a massive storm, and the call went out that there was a ship wrecking on the beach. So my granddad went off to find out what he could find. He walked up and down the beach, and he's looking for anything he could sell. And suddenly he sees a woman, and she's not dead. Now, one of the things that they could do was they could maybe rescue people who weren't quite dead and nurse them back to health, and then ransom them. Well, get money from their families for looking after them. Ransom. Anyhow, he reaches out and he goes to pull her hand, to pull her back up onto the beach. And as he does, he looks and he sees that on her hand there is the most beautiful emerald ring. Now let me think about this one. I'm going to get an awful lot more money from an emerald ring than I am from making her recover. Now what can I do about this? Well, he had to think, and he decided the easiest way was he knelt down, and instead of pulling her out of the water, he pushed her head back under the water. And then he took out his knife, and he cut off her finger, and he took the ring. Well, he knew that that was more money than he was going to make in a lot of time, so he went back to tell my grandma all about it. He walks into the house and tells her. My grandmother pitched a fit. She was absolutely horrified that he could have done such a horrible thing. She walked out of the house yelling that no good would ever come of this. And she was right. He never did have any luck after that. In fact, things got so bad that they moved up to near Halifax way. And eventually it got so bad that he took the ring and he had to pawn it. You know what pawning is? Pawnbrokers were people, well, they still are people. If you've got something valuable and you need money, you go to them and you give them the valuable and they advance you some money. And then when you have some spare cash, you go and you get your belongings back. Well, he took the ring to a pawnbroker who gave him 20 shillings, which was nothing really compared with the cost of the ring, but it was the best he could get. Well, Grandad went off looking for work. He was always up and down the coast trying to find somebody who would hire him for a day or what have you. He left my grandma and my mother in the little cottage that they were living in. The problem was that the rectors were getting a very bad reputation. My granddad wasn't the only one who was pulling fast ones like this. So the governor decided that he wanted to have somebody check what was going on. So now who was it? He brought in a captain from the Navy, Edmund Torrens, his name was. He was a very well-respected officer in the Navy, and everybody knew that if somebody could find out what was going on with the wreckers, he could. So he gets on his ship, and he heads towards Halifax. Well, wouldn't you know it? He's shipwrecked. And by sheer coincidence, he's wrecked on the very same island where my granddad used to live. Coincidence, it's a funny thing, but there he was, on the island. He was the only survivor. Well, him and his dog. The dog survived. None of the other people on the ship survived. So he was there on his own, and he was exploring the island and wondering if he was going to ever get rescued. And he comes across a little cottage-type place. So he decides, well, any shelter's better than staying out in the dark. So he goes in, and there's a fireplace, and there's some old firewood there, and he thinks, this is great. So he builds a fire, and he's about to sit down and take, stock of the situation. The dog wants to go out. You know what dogs are like. They always want to go out. So he takes the dog out for a walk. About 15 minutes later, they come back, and he opens the door, and stops in the doorway, sitting in front of the fire. There's a lady. He knows she's a lady because she's wearing a really, really nice gown. Well, it would have been really, really nice if it hadn't been quite so waterlogged. And she's sitting there, water dripping down her. She's wringing water out of her hair in front of the fire. And he says, excuse me, can I help you? And she turns around and she looks at him. And she lifts up her hand. And her hand's missing a finger. And there's blood dripping down her arm in the water. Well, he's horrified. I'll get some bandages and we'll fix you right up. He goes to find something to bandage her with, turns back, she's gone. She's not there. Well, he was a brave guy, and he decided that maybe it was just the panic and all the rest of it from the shipwreck, and he was just seeing things. So he settled down, he had a night's sleep. Next day, he wandered around the island, still no sign of rescue. In the evening, he builds another fire, and he takes the dog out for a walk again. Dogs are very recognised. He comes back to the hut, he opens the door, she's back, sitting in front of the fire, dripping wet still. Well, at this point he begins to think that maybe there's something not quite right about this. And he looks a bit closer at her. He says, Mrs. Copeland, is that you? Dr. Copeland was the regimental doctor, and everybody knew all about his wife and that she was on the ship. He says, are you all right? He said, you're not a ghost, are you? He said, well, what are you doing here? And she lifts up her hand again, missing one finger, all this blood dripping down it. He says, whatever happened to the emerald ring of yours? Everybody knew in the regiment knew about the emerald ring. He says, I'll find the people who stole that ring and I will get revenge for you. She shakes her head. He says, what do you want? You want me to take the ring back to your family, is that it? Okay, I promise, I swear on my life, I will find the ring, I will take it back to your family. And she nods and says thank you. And he turns away for a second and turns back, and she's gone. He never saw her again. But he was as good as his word. He was finally rescued from the island, and as soon as he got back to Halifax, he started looking about, trying to find a wrecker. It had to be somebody from the wrecking community who had done this. Well, he hears a rumour about a family who appear to have come into some good luck with a ring. So he goes and he introduces himself and he gets pally with them. And one day, they invite him to dinner. Of course, that's my grandma. Well, he comes to the house for dinner. And because he knows that he wants to bring the conversation round to a ring, he wears a really big gaudy ring. And they're sitting having dinner and talking, and my mother, who was probably about this big at the time, a bit young and a bit stupid, and she looks at his hand over the dinner table and she says, "Oh, Captain Torrance, that's a really nice ring, but it isn't half as nice as the one that my father got off the lady on the beach." Yes, my grandmother was freaking out. She's trying to do damage control. She said, no. It was, your father got that from a French lady. She's coming up with any story she can to shut my mother up, and you can guarantee my mother was very uncomfortable after that. But Captain Torrance said, "Oh, don't worry about it. I fully understand. You know, these things happen. Could I possibly see the ring?" "Oh no, sorry, we had to pawn it. My husband pawned it up in Halifax, pawnbroker." "Oh, that's a shame. I would have liked to have seen the ring." At the end of the evening, Captain Torrance leaves the hut, gets out of the hut, and heads off to Halifax, helter-skelter. Well, there were only a few pawnbrokers in Halifax, so eventually he finds the right one. And he goes in, and the pawnbroker shows him this beautiful emerald ring. And says, "Yes, I got it from a wrecker. I gave him 20 shillings for it." Captain Torrance says, "Could I possibly look at it?" He's standing there looking at it, and he says to the pawnbroker, "I've searched for this ring for 5 months, and I know its entire story. Here's the 20 shillings you advanced. If the owner wants it back, once more, tell him to bring back the finger that was cut off to get it." Well, the pawnbroker wasn't going to argue. He backed off. Captain Torrance took the ring. A few months later, he was reassigned somewhere else in the British Empire. Who knows where? You know how they move people around in the army and the navy. Nobody's ever heard where he went. Nobody ever heard anything more about the ring. But every now and then, on the island, somebody sees the lady with her missing finger and the blood running down her arm. I wonder what Edmund Torrance did with that ring.
There was a story my grandfather once told me. The legend of Apple Island. On Apple Island lived a young and beautiful girl, a descendant of one of the royal governors. One day, her dead and lifeless body was recovered ashore of Apple Island. The young girl also had a sweetheart who went missing one day. A friend of his came him saying a few weeks later that he had gone and joined a band of robbers that was living on the island at the time to find out details of this girl's death. One day, a fisherman was going by Apple Island, saw something on the old oak at the top of the island. The authorities were notified. When the thing was cut down, it was found to be the body of the sweetheart. Every now and again, you can see them walking up and down the paths of Apple Island.
I'm Mary Burton. I'd like to tell you a story about loyalty. You'll forgive me my notes. It's been over 200 years. I forget a few details. It's 1776. General Washington's forces have occupied Dorchester Heights. My husband, William, and I, loyal to the British Crown, of course, join over 6,000 British officers and men and 3,000 other British loyalists on ships in Boston Harbor, ready to evacuate. On March 17th, Abigail Adams writes in her diary that it is the largest fleet ever assembled in America, over 170 sail. Yet on that day, evacuation day, only 78 ships leave the harbor. The weeks roll past. I become friendly with some of the other women on board the ship. June 13th, 1776. Only 13 ships remain in the harbor. 13 British, loyal ships. And rebel American forces find it necessary to plan a bombardment. They occupy Long Island, up on the hill, to bombard the British ships. I'm in the quarters of my friends, the other women on board. We're chatting. And I don't have any time to be scared. The very first cannonball from the bombardment comes in an open portal and mortally wounds me. I collapse into my husband William's arms. I plead with him. William, please, please don't bury me at sea. Bring me to shore, William. Bury me on shore. Do me this one bit of loyalty to my memory so that you'll have a place to come to remember me, William, please. He assures me, I will, Mary. I will. Those are the last words I hear. William gets permission to bring my body ashore. Under the flag of truce, the longboat is prepared. My body is sewn into a scarlet blanket. William carries my remains into the longboat, onto shore, hikes up the hill, finds the very rebel soldiers responsible, explains his mission, and buries me. A short service is said. One of the soldiers agrees to eventually put a tombstone by the spot, and William leaves. Back to the ship, his captain is anxiously awaiting his arrival, and they depart for Halifax within the hour. The men do erect a small wooden headstone. William has every intention of being loyal, of coming back, of returning and visiting. And the years roll by, and the surrender in Yorktown, and the century turns, and he passes away without ever having returned. 1804, a group of fishermen are shipwrecked off of Long Island. They manage to find their way to shore. They hike up the hill. They come to the old magazine area of the fort, the storage area for the arms in the fort. They try to make a fire. They huddle down, and they hear this strange moaning sound. They go to investigate, and they see over the hill the form of a woman moaning, wrapped in a scarlet cloak. The War of 1812, there's another sighting of the woman in scarlet. People have forgotten my name. Now just the woman in scarlet. Well, I'm glad that at least these two visitations of mine have been documented. I assure you there have been more, and there will continue to be whenever a storm rages in the Atlantic. With thunder to wake the dead, with cannon like thunder to wake the dead, you will find me searching for my husband's spirit, hoping that he will finally have returned and prove himself as loyal to my memory as he was to the British Crown.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Reverend Samuel Treat. My parish is located in Eastham on Cape Cod. In the spring of 1707, I had the distinct pleasure of meeting with a young fellow named Jonathan. He recently graduated from Harvard University. While we were seated, speaking with one another, he expressed an interest in going into the ministry.